All right, everyone, welcome to the April 13th JupyterLab weekly call. Today we have 15 people on the call. Hopefully more will come as we progress, but for now, why don't we get started? We have Frederic first on the agenda.
Hey guys, so there are lots of bullet points, but mainly announcements. So the CZI call for the 5th round of open source support is due in a week. So I plan to submit the letter of intent for the notebook JupyterLab maintenance and documentation by Friday. So there is the link for that letter of intent if you want to bring some additional comment or whatever. Like, there is still a couple of days left, so feel free to do so. So that's the first announcement. Next one, we get the monthly performance meeting just after this one and on the same Zoom account. What goes next? Okay, then I have a question for PR from Eric. So Eric has modified the virtual rendering. Currently on the 3.x JupyterLab, if you have, I think it's more than 50 cells in a notebook, the additional cells are not rendered directly. The rendering is delayed. That has bring a couple of issues, let's say. So the PR that Eric has done is removing that feature by default and moving it behind configuration. And so the question of Eric was, should it be backported to 3.3.x or should it be part of 3.4? I think as it will change the way the notebook is rendered for a user that have big notebooks, it will be probably better to make it part of 3.4 rather than a patch release of 3.3. So that's my opinion. So the PR is linked, and yeah, feel free to comment. Also, there are some technical element also on the PR if you want to look at what are the change exactly. Then next, it's a couple of PRs that I have. It would be nice if somebody can have a look and review them, especially the first one, because it's like a month old, waiting for review. So I would appreciate. And then I will skip to the last element. So I will do the 3.x release tomorrow. It will depend on the answer of the backport for Eric PR. And then just after it, I will create the 3.4.x branch and I will release the first version of 3.4.0. As a reminder, the ETA, it's to do a release by the end of the month of 3.4.0. And the last point is related to discussion of the 2 previous weeks about the UI toolkit. It will be cool if we can set up a date and time for a specific discussion on that point.
Go ahead, please.
In scheduling a time for that, do you need, like, I mean, I have calendar access if that's helpful. Do you have a time in mind? Or I think it probably would be easier if we put something on there, even if we had to move it. Otherwise, I think we're not going to pick a day.
I don't have strong opinion on how to proceed. It's just, it would be nice to have one schedule.
Okay. I can look. I have to look. I have to move community calls, I think, so I can put that on my calendar list and I can just choose something and let you know, and then we can move it. Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
I was going to ask you guys if anyone wants to do a review matching donation. If you volunteer to review one of these 3 PRs, I will volunteer to review one of the remaining 2. This offer is open for the next 30 seconds. Come on, someone.
I like the idea. I don't think I have the skills, but if there's one you think I should try and review.
To be fair, the first and the third are quite big. The second one is the easiest.
I can try to review the table of contents one within that code.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Since you took one of the big ones, I'll take the other big one. I will review the search one. Awesome,
Thanks.
thank you. All right, if anyone wants to review the middle one, it is the small one, so pretty good bang for the buck. But let's move on for now. Okay, Jason W., you are up next.
Hey, so want to give a great shout out to Frederic for helping out with the cell toolbar that is now merged into master. I believe it's going to get pulled into 3.4.x. Is the me-seek spot going to do that, or should I do that manually?
Let's give a try to the bot and see what's happening.
Okay.
But the branch is not yet created, so I will do it
Okay.
tomorrow. Don't worry.
Okay.
Don't worry. We'll see.
I'll keep an eye on my email. That's like the highlight of every morning, is seeing like overnight feedback from our friends in Europe. Okay, so thank you very much for everyone's help and contributions on that. There is also a cell toolbar tag, a package cell toolbar tag. So if you file bugs and enhancements, please tag them with cell toolbar, so that way we can kind of track those. There's already a couple that are tagged that way. 2 other questions that came up based on conversations I've had internally. One is, I had heard from somewhere, and unfortunately Brian is out at an offsite meeting today. What is the status of like versioning within JupyterLab? There is a JupyterLab Git extension, but I had heard somewhere that like versioning metadata is already part of the JupyterLab data model. We just don't have a UI for it. Am I right, or am I wrong on that?
Do you mean the checkpoints feature?
Is that what it is?
There is on the server side the checkpoint features, but I think the default implementation is only to have one backup version. I don't think it's creating versioning. It's probably like a custom content manager can change that behavior, if I remember correctly. But by default, I think it's only creating one checkpoint.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was doing a little research on this earlier in the week and found a bunch of articles that were saying, like, if you want version control in JupyterLab, you should be using Git or Jupytext or other extensions that were kind of built for that, and that there wasn't versioning capability built in or built into the UI. So I just wanted to confirm that.
I think, I mean, there is checkpoints, the checkpoint mechanism. It's very confusing. And there's a longstanding issue that says that JupyterLab only provides access to the latest checkpoint, whereas the notebook provides access to any checkpoint. And I think there's an issue and maybe even a PR about providing access to multiple checkpoints.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that specific point has been addressed, yeah, as Jason said, but there has been a PR to display a dialog with the list of checkpoints if there are multiple checkpoints. I'm trying to find it.
Okay, yeah, if you could share that in the chat, that's kind of, I didn't know the word checkpoint was used for this purpose. That helps me a lot to like explain this and find stuff in the document. So thank you so much about that. There's one other question about an internal team that's working on some extension updates. We're talking about pre-built extensions that share libraries. When installing different extensions as pre-built extensions that share libraries, do those libraries duplicate in the code or vended to the browser? Is it kind of like static linked binaries in that the libraries are vended twice if you have two pre-built extensions?
Only if you ask for it. So if you know, like a common pattern is you'd have a, hub and spoke thing. So there'd be the whatever majig core and, JupyterLab, whatever majig core, it has a shared library of whatever majig. It's bundled and it's shared. And then whatever majig, commands or whatever majig extra home button would rely on that. You can do it with all of them have a copy of it. If they really are independent, you don't need them together.
Okay, but so if a developer doesn't choose, are the libraries shared or deployed like statically?
Webpack will bundle everything.
Webpack bundles everything.
But aren't they not like the direct dependency? There is a specific treatment for them, no? If I remember correctly.
It's a bit subtle in that Nick's right, Webpack bundles it. We override that when we build extensions so that core libraries are always shared. So the default depends on if it's a core library or one of our special extensions that we're overriding when you build build an extension, or if it's not. So if it's not a core library, by default, it's bundled in the Webpack bundle and not shared with other things. And then you have to explicitly note in your configuration that you want this particular dependency shared.
Okay.
And if some people, if one extension says share this dependency, and another extension doesn't say that, then the one that doesn't share the dependency will use its own copy. So essentially, sharing says, I will contribute my version of the dependencies to the global sharing, and I will use whatever the sharing is based on some logic around version numbers and things like that. But by default, it's keep everything in my own bundle and don't share anything.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Can I ask Jason to address? Jason, were you the one? Somebody recently opened up an issue about security versions, support for old versions of JupyterLab. Was that you, Jason?
It probably was, because that's another conversation I've had. That JupyterLab 1 is still not only used but sold by AWS, which I'm not particularly proud of. And so actually the conversation about extensions is directly related to the effort to move from JL1 to JL3. I haven't had the heart to tell everyone that we're moving to JL4 sometime soon, but 3 is better than 1.
Maybe we can add it to the additional discussion, but I'd love some quick discussion around making an official policy about what versions of JupyterLab are supported, i.e. what bug fixes, how far back do we backport bug fixes, and if we have some time-based policy, which is I think what you were asking for, or is it version-based policy, etc.
I've been talking about it. I actually just opened an issue about this as a result of yesterday's security meeting. I can drop that in the chat. This might be a good place to have discussion about it, because I included some links to examples, including the Node.js one, which is my personal favorite, about like how to communicate this information. Because having a document on a third-party website that I can point to and say, see, you can't use JupyterLab 3 after this date because you won't get security updates. You're gonna have to do them yourself. That's much more powerful than what we have right now.
So I have to admit that I have been speaking about this as though we had a policy. And the policy that I thought we had was we support the current version and the previous version.
Yeah,
Is that just a thing I made up or misremembered, or is that a thing we're doing?
We discussed that. I know we discussed that exact policy in detail at the in-person dev meeting we had a couple years back. And that was what we decided, but that was just those of us that were there physically deciding that. I don't think we made it an official policy or put it anywhere. I think it was just us deciding it because we needed something.
That's listed in the issue as the N-1 strategy. which I've heard for Notebook, like Notebook 8 will mean the end of support for Notebook 6, for example. And JupyterLab 4 will mean the end of JupyterLab 2 support.
Well, but the reason you've heard that in the notebook context is because I said it, because I
Yes.
thought that was our official policy. So it's actually self-referential.
Yeah. But the point is that, like, I think we're all in agreement here, is that we've come to a general consensus out loud, but we haven't documented this and published it anywhere.
And there's two things that I think are issues with that. One, as Jason points out, I think in that issue is it doesn't give people concrete timelines. And so it's hard to say, 2 will not be supported or 3 will not be supported in, X months. So you should start moving off. Instead, we say when we release the next version, but then the next version gets delayed, and then people aren't sure sort of how to plan out a migration strategy. And the second,
oh, go ahead, Jason.
The second issue with that is we have seen a lot of enterprises, Amazon being one, but others as well, that a yearly cadence is sort of too fast, and so they jump versions from 1 to 3 instead of adopting 2. And so I guess that works with an N-1 strategy, but it's a little bit, if there was a little bit more overlap, it would help institutions deploying JupyterLab.
I also remember that conversation we had was centered around the commitment to a yearly major release. So when we made that decision, we also were thinking that major also meant yearly. So we were thinking 2 years of support.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Node example, like Node has a frequent cadence and a long-term support cadence, which I think those are the odd and even versions respectively. To be blunt, I've talked to people who insist they need support for Node 10 and Node 8, which left even long-term support years ago. And I tell them, look, there are no more security vulnerabilities. So if anything comes out that targets Node 10, that's on you. That's not on the Node developers anymore. And to me, that's a more powerful, the fact that I can point to that Gantt style chart on their website is a powerful motivator. And so if we could have a similar chart that says, like, if you're still using JupyterLab 2, after X date, we will no longer provide our own security patches for it. That's lighting a fire under people to say, if you're still using JL2, time to start talking about upgrading.
Well, we can't. We can try to meet our yearly major version goal, but we simply can't release something if it's not releasable. What we can do is try to soften that by saying we target a major release a year. We support using the N-1 strategy, but we also give you, I don't know, some sort of like 90-day buffer where N-2, we give you the 90-day countdown for it or something like that. What Nick just wrote in the chat totally caught me off guard because I wasn't expecting to see the word mermaid in there. So yeah, I mean, is this maybe everyone who has thought about this or has a position they want to advocate should comment in that issue. This seems like the kind of thing where we could vote on it, but I imagine we could probably arrive at a consensus because I'm not hearing that much dissent here. So I would suggest leaving this issue for a week, getting some commentary, and then trying to close it next week with here's a PR to the Team Compass repo or to the README on the main repo that basically says this is our supported version policy.
Well, I guess to bootstrap off that, I mean, the one on Node is, the second, or it takes like one click off of the homepage to get to that schedule, to get to that calendar. And so perhaps this is a thing that needs to be on Jupyter.org, right?
Yeah.
Well, but Node is one thing. Jupyter is a lot of things. And it's a lot of things that end up at different points in the stack. JupyterLab
Yeah.
is a client application. Jupyter Server doesn't have the same constraints that JupyterLab has. So I don't imagine one policy Jupyter wide is appropriate, but I do think getting that information one click from Jupyter.org is really good. I just don't know if it'll be one policy for every Jupyter product.
Notably, I'm looking at the top nav on Jupyter.org, and there is no support thing. There is no support link. Now, I know that the idea of putting a support link on an open source project is begging for problems, because of course we are not providing technical support. But you know, wordsmith it if we need to. But I would love to have a Gantt chart, you know, or some such where I can just point to it and say, this is what we've agreed upon. And so if you want an extension on this, come to the page. But like, biased by the company I work for, and I'm sure that some of you folks have worked at companies that are similar, which is that when an old version is no longer supported, the inertia has people say like, well, the sprint board says I'm not allowed to upgrade because that's going to add all this complexity, so I have to keep using this ancient version forever. And it's not going to convince any of us, but it's going to drive people to like use an older version well past time when they otherwise would migrate off of it if we don't provide guidance that says you have to get off of it.
I think the word support implies something different than what we're talking about. The word support to me sounds like technical support. It doesn't sound like supported versions.
Yeah, I mean, we can, again, like on the Node site, it's under the About section, which I'm also okay with. Like the About section is a whole section of Node.js. It's not a single page like Jupyter.org's About page is. So we could say like, you know, about the people, about the software, about the projects under it. Like we could do a little bit of reorganization. But I like the idea of adding it to the website somewhere reasonably prominent.
We could also disconnect the ideas of when end of life is and when other versions come. So you can have essentially an n-1 strategy, but capped at a time-based support window for a release. So for example, for 2.0, we could say, we'll support this for at least 2 years and maybe at most 2 years. So plan on it for 2 years. We'll plan to have 4.0 out by the end of the 2 years. But if 4.0 actually ends up taking 2 years to release instead of 1 year, I think it's okay to tell people 2.0 is still phased out 2 years after it was released. And please move to 3.0, which is our current release. And we're still working on 4.0. So that addresses when the end of life of for 2.0 is, which is something important for us to not maintain, not like it's a burden to keep maintaining the old software. Yeah. But it also addresses the timeline that you're asking for, but it doesn't completely commit us to releasing 4.0 on a yearly cadence.
A skeptical, cynical engineer might say, but wouldn't that mean that there's potentially a point where all versions of JupyterLab become unsupported if we don't release often enough? And yes. That's all the more reason for us to actually do the thing.
Yeah, I mean, everything has a pathological failure mode, but we're not pathological humans. I think we'll do better than that.
I mean, the fact that we meet every week is going to be reason enough to keep ourselves honest about this stuff.
Okay.
Alex, thank you for leaving the comment on that issue. I encourage everyone else with an opinion on this to add comments on this, and maybe at the meeting on the 20th, a week from today, we can have like a more action-oriented discussion about this.
Cool. Thanks, Jason. Alex, you are up next.
Yeah, just quick updates for me. For those that joined late, I archived some of our older meeting notes in this HackMD so it behaves faster like we do every quarter. And I opened up the PR for my code viewer widget that I demoed last week. So that's ready for people's feedback. I am working on adding the ability to restore on page refresh because it seemed from the comments that that would be a blocker for getting it in. So yeah, so code review and further feedback. If possible, I think it would be a good task to iterate on. So getting the functioning code in and then adding more functionality in follow-ups rather than blocking the merging of it on getting all these cool new features. Everybody's like, oh, we could also use it for this. Because there was a lot of that, which I'm really excited about. So yeah, just a short update from me.
Could you please put a little screencast in the PR? I think that would be really nice for people to see.
Oh yeah, like a video? Sure.
Yeah. Thank you. It looks as though we are at the additional discussion section, but was there or is there anyone on the call who would like to do an update that has not added their name to the agenda? I'll give you a second to think about that.
Just because it made Darren pause for a moment, but so Mermaid.js is now part of GitHub flavored Markdown, and we should probably support it because it's pretty good. I mean, it's like the Vega of random box and stick diagrams. So I don't know if there's a path to doing that with Marked, or if that would trigger, hey, it's time to consider the Markdown it as an alternative to Marked. I know we already moved that out into a plugin, but you know, what's that? Just thought.
Do you offhand know if we'd be doing any sort of, aside from the visual implications and maybe slight discrepancies, are there any API breakages, or is this something that could come out in a point release if it turns out that it has the features we want without clobbering public APIs? I know that's a very specific question, so if you don't know the answer, that's fine. But I was just wondering if we have to basically try to get this in for 4.0, or if it could be a 4.1 or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, Marked as it exists today is not extensible. So to my knowledge, I mean, we have to do ugly stuff to make the LaTeX work, right? And it is not pretty. So yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody's relying on it because there's nothing to rely on. The baseline renderer is just kind of what it is. I mean, no, I don't think it would block anything. And if you really want it, you can go get a plugin, and that's maybe the way it should be. But yeah, JFM, right, for real. But I don't know. I think it is a good point. More well defined. Yeah, I wish Markdown was more well defined. I mean, it's great. It like just works great. And we've already got a reference, you know, stealable implementation. I'm sure our buddy Angus wouldn't care if we, you know, lifted it up into there, and Mist's already using it and has already done a bunch of work on it. So
what William and Jason are talking about in the chat here is really interesting to me. Is it time to define the Markdown that Jupyter notebooks support and make it easy for different clients to support the same set of Markdown features that we support, and to make notebooks more predictable in the way they're going to render? Or is is creating one new thing a problem, and we should say, no, actually what we're doing is we're 100% adopting GitHub flavor Markdown or something like that? Or like where is this in the life cycle of feature all the way to specification?
CommonMark never formalized a plugin documentation architecture, so it kind of is what it is. But I'll let William. Looks like William's trying to say them.
Just that I really hope that that happens, because I would like to, know how notebooks people create in CodeCalc might fail on Jupyter Classic or JupyterLab, and conversely, and be able to document that. Right now, it's just very kind of random, read the source code of Jupyter Classic kind of thing. So, I mean, for example, when do $signs signify mathematics? I think there's a random JavaScript file, somewhere in the notebook that defines that for you guys. And I literally copied that code and was using it to try to keep compatibility, so that if somebody uses math in a Jupyter Classic notebook, it'll get interpreted the same way in CodeCalc. But that's a really, the whole approach to parsing out math is pretty ugly. It's much better to use a proper plugin to a Markdown parser. So I recently found a really good plugin for math for Markdown, which is much more well written, and I switched to using that. And then I added a bunch of regular expressions to make it behave much more like what people expect based on having used JupyterLab or Jupyter Classic, because none of the multiple different configuration options for that plugin matched what Jupyter does, incidentally. Because there's a lot of subtlety. It's not just $signs, it's also like begin environments and stuff. Those all switch over to math mode. And so just deciding exactly when you switch to math mode is something that would be really nice to document. Probably doesn't match up exactly with GitHub. But if you documented it, then that would be really helpful for everybody else. So that's my perspective. And similar remarks go for a lot of other things in terms of Markdown. I'm sure Pete has some thoughts too, or at least I'd love to hear if he has any about the same question, because you guys must parse Markdown somehow.
Yeah, we have a number of bugs. It's been a pain. We've I think all of our bugs are fixed, but the number of edge cases and everything has been a real pain. I'd love to contribute some tests or something like that. A spec is good if we can get some standardized testing or something like that. I think that'd be even better. Our Markdown, I'm a little scared of it just because of how many changes and random stuff that we've had to do with marked. So I'm scared, but I'd love to explore it. Yeah, Mermaid seems cool.
So with the changing architecture of Jupyter Notebook, at least the thing that Jason Grout mentions in the chat goes away, right? Where there won't be discrepancies between notebook and lab. That also seems like a good opportunity to say, here's how Jupyter Notebook Markdown should work, because at the very least, we are arriving at a point where Jupyter front ends are going to be coherent and doing the same thing. It seems like a good time to document that for everyone else. Yeah, I don't know about that, Pete. I'm not saying I don't know in a flippant way. I truly just don't know the answer to that.
I'll give a +1 to Kotek at this point, but I haven't looked into the compatibility in quite a while. We had compatibility issues. It would, I mean, the MathJax and Kotek and everything, the surface area of that is ginormous. So I'm being somewhat flippant when I mentioned standardizing that, inspecting that.
I think KTEX had better compatibility often with LaTeX than MathJax 2, where MathJax 2 would parse stuff that wasn't valid LaTeX.
But yeah, the compatibility here is backwards compatibility, really.
Yeah, yeah. KTEX is missing, I think, \mbox, which is Jason also points that out, which can be noticeable, but it's pretty good otherwise. I use it as much as possible in CodeCalc, and then if something's missing, it falls back to math checks.
Yeah, and one of the other things that we had looked at, once allowing it to be extensible is awesome yet terrifying, right? So the fact that you were not doing anything special to get math rendering, it's just part of the architecture, right? I'm going to put some more tokens in there. But I've seen people ask for the ability to put multiple languages inside of one document, right? And like, cool, we can do that. I can make a plugin that does that, all right. But now everybody has to know that that plugin is a thing. And so, yeah, I think that the thing that we would need is not a spec, because that is Markdown has been resistant to that thus far. I'm not sure if we would have that, but a conformance suite, that is a set of notebooks, a set of Markdown files, the things that we anticipate would be rendered, descriptions of settings inside of the settings schema, I don't know, whatever, all those places. It's unfortunate, but I don't see really how you would, I don't see how we get around that. As to the math thing, one thing that would potentially be very powerful is forget about this stuff. I'm going to be like Wikipedia. If you got it and you've got, ZLaTeX or something back on your server, I'm just going to render it on the server. I'm going to give it back to you as an SVG. I don't got time for this, right? So they don't even, they hoist it all the way up, but they do not bother with rendering in the browser at scale.
I would find the first thing Nick said to be super useful, which would be even one single notebook that has kind of all the math checks, all the Markdown functionality you can think of that Jupyter should support just used. Then I can look at it and see if it looks right and compare visually, if nothing else. That would be extremely useful to have.
Pete, you said one word in chat, accessibility. Can you elaborate?
Oh, that was on server-side rendering of Markdown. Or
yeah, Joe, over the Jupyter accessibility meeting, we had somebody say, like, I just read the LaTeX, like I just speak native LaTeX, because whatever you do is not going to be great, So as long as you hoist that source all the way through, which Wikipedia does do, you can go grab it right out of there. That is the, for all its warts, it is a lingua franca.
Okay.
That's a specific
This is a good conversation. What can come out of this? What should we do?
Well, it would be like going to MathJax 3 would be better. There is an open issue for that on JupyterLab. There's an open issue for that on NB-Convert. And that Jupyter or NB-Convert pretty much has to get off Mistune, right? So we're already going to have a risk there or something. So defining the reference documents for notebooks and how they should appear is very important right now, right? Because I think something's going to give in a bunch of different directions. So maybe that's all it is.
Okay, so Jason says this could be the basis of a JEP. I think as a precursor to a JEP, there could be a JupyterLab repo that has a bunch of notebooks with different kinds of Markdown and the benchmarking suite that Frederic has written could be used to see, are those working as we release new versions. And that could be the basis of proposing it as a JEP once we have basically something that is stable and we can point to and say, this covers all the edge cases we know about, or enough of them that we recommend other Jupyter Notebook implementations also adopt the same suite.
Could we just define some Gelato tests? Does the benchmark test, do they do screenshots? So if we did some Gelato tests that were just notebook rendering, that would already help, even just to make sure we don't have regressions and a bunch of markdown examples and what they should look like when they're rendered.
Yeah, that's totally possible. Yeah.
Does anyone feel like working on this?
My trouble is I don't have good sources for typical notebook, but if somebody can point me to some places I can find some of them, like with big edge cases, then it shouldn't be too hard to set up some test.
I think William and Pete have lots of corner cases they were talking about. They might have some good examples of corner cases that they've had to test.
All right, do we have an issue at least so we can say post some markdown in this issue? That seems like a good. All right. Cool. So maybe Nick, since you brought it up, please could you open an issue and link it here, and then Pete, William, anyone else who writes funky things in markdown cells, could you post some examples of what's either an edge case or just, you know, base case, and anything that we should be testing. And
there is a very old issue from Jason of 2016.
All right. Wow.
Yeah, let's use that one. I've seen that one linked in other places. Do you have the link there? Yeah, nice.
Cool. Good find. Okay. Let's move to the additional discussion section. Jason, I assume you wrote the first one?
Yeah,
Jason,
just a FYI announcement that we have currently set up a presentation by Don J. Amani, who works on VS Code and Jupyter compatibility in VS Code, to talk about widgets in VS Code next Tuesday at our widgets dev meeting. I've had at least one request that we might move that, so just pay attention to the IPy widgets Gitter channel if you are planning on coming, and we'll announce if there is a change to that. I'll announce it there, and we'll record it too.
Thanks, Jason. Speaking of recording calls, I am still in the process of trying to get into the cloud account for our Zoom to do something with these recordings. I asked everyone in Jupyter who might potentially have these credentials, and literally nobody said, I have them. So the next step is, all right, time to do a password reset for the account that is the two-factor auth that Zoom is using before to let me onto their webpage. So I can sign into Zoom. I'm signed in as Project Jupyter on Zoom's app, but I cannot sign in to the Zoom webpage, which is where these recordings reside, apparently, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, and 3 or 4 weeks ago, I downloaded Pete's. I did the same thing. I recorded Pete's presentation about IPy widgets, and I downloaded it and got it up to YouTube. So let me see if I can access it. Maybe for some reason.
You downloaded it from the Zoom webpage?
I think so. I mean, it's up
Yeah.
on YouTube, and I recorded it in Zoom Cloud. So let me see if I have access to it without two-factor.
Maybe that's why it two-factored me, because somebody over there did it.
In the Bay Area, yeah, downloaded it, right.
Fair
Possible.
enough. Okay, thank you.
I can also access it. I thought you said you set up two-factor authentication. It kicked me out too, but I can see all these recordings, so I don't know what you did to yourself, Darian.
So Isabella, you
Maybe I
could.
was just late to the party, right? Maybe enough people had signed in that they were like, wait, there's somebody in London also trying to get into
But I
this account?
sign out after, like I don't stay signed in, if that makes sense. So that's why I don't know why I'd give you a problem. What do you want me to do, Jason?
Well, if you've got it in front of you, Darian has a list of recordings he'd like downloaded and then uploaded to YouTube.
There's a lot of them. Is it just
Let-
all of them?
Well, let's talk about this after we stop
Okay.
recording this call. All right, we have one other point in the additional discussions. I don't know who added it. Is it Rick?
Is that the security point?
Yeah.
I added that
Oh, yeah,
point, but we had a long discussion. Oh, Rick, no, you're the more the. So I added the point, and I thought we had the discussion.
Yeah, and I added the link to the issue for that discussion underneath it. So that is the discussion we already had.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will stop the recording now in case there's something that somebody wants to say offline. Here goes.